So welcome. We are Made in Hackney. We are the UK's oldest and first community cookery school, and we really focus on creating sort of change through the power of food, and that food is everything made by plants. So we do that in a number of ways. We have our cookery school, which has been running since day one, and we now have a community meal service as well, which has been running since 2020. And all of this is really vital food support that is needed by hundreds and thousands of people really across London, but also part of the wider food system change that we're trying to be. So I'm just going to pass over to and introduce Fran, who is our development manager and expert in all things fundraising.
Great, thank you. Could we have the next? So hi everyone, I'm Fran, I'm the development manager at Made in Hackney. So yeah, as Sarita mentioned, that means main part of my job is around income generation and fundraising. I know for lots of people, fundraising can be quite a scary aspect of setting up your own initiative and organisation. And there are lots and lots of different ways to fundraise, as you can see on the slide. And each avenue has its own pros and cons. And really, it's also about focusing on the opportunities and strengths of your particular initiative, as well as your own skills and your network. So today, we're going to talk about three main areas of fundraising. So grants, which is one of the main ways that people in the UK will be raising funds initially, crowdfunding and non-monetary support. First, start to talk about fundraising through grants, and we're going to focus on some of the top tips. But these tips are not just applicable for grants; they're normally applicable for any way that you want to fundraise. So, first of all, kind of what do we mean by grants? I don't know if anyone here has ever applied for a grant before, but when I talk about grants, I mean funding normally given by a trust or foundation, who are often charities in their own rights, but they can also be from corporations that might have set up a grant giving arm. There's normally a set of eligibility criteria to be able to apply for that money, some kind of application process, normally some kind of written document. And then if you're successful, the money is given to you, your organisation, in exchange for agreeing to a contract. So you're normally made to sign a contract. And now the agreement is, with the contract, you're bound to deliver what you wrote in your application with the money that they've given you. Obviously, to caveat, there's lots of variations on this. Some grants don't have specific application procedures. They might just find you or you write to them. Some may give you funds for your whole organisation and not just for a specific project. But normally you're still following the same process, and you need to have the same fundamental things in place, which is you kind of always need to have a clear idea of what you're doing, why, what's your impact going to be, and how much that's going to cost. So tip one, which sounds maybe a little bit basic, but you always need to know what you want to do, why you want to do it, and the difference. And whilst that might sound quite basic, it can still be a common problem when you come to start putting pen to paper. If you cannot clearly articulate these things and do it quite succinctly, it will show as you come to write more and more in your grant application, or as you come to talk to people. So this is essentially your elevator pitch, and you're going to need it time and time again. And what's also really important is you don't focus too much on the what, for example, the cooking activities, but you really understand the why, because the why and the difference. So for example, the why is for example, for Made in Hackney, we want to reduce health inequalities. And the difference we're going to make, we're going to improve community health, health, that's what people are funding. They're not funding the cookery activities. They're funding the why and the difference. So you're probably going to have thought about this when you're setting up your cookery school, and you're having to maybe, you know, if you're becoming a charity, you're going to have to put some of this information in some of your administrative documents, but it can still be easily overlooked. And I would say, don't always assume there's a consensus in the team. Talk about it and write about it in clear sentences. And at this point, you're going to want to start gathering some evidence of why. So, for example, in the case of Made in Hackney, health is one of our pillars. It's why we do what we do. And why is that? Because the local data tells us that there are health issues in Hackney. Because the community tells us that they are struggling with certain health issues that diet can support. And so you want to start gathering some of this information to demonstrate, the why part of what you do. So I'm going to move on to tip 2 now. So again, this is a really common mistake, and something I've heard from people starting out on their fundraising journey, is that most funders receive a lot of applications where the organisation or the project does not fit their criteria. So before you start again putting pen to paper or thinking about applying, really check what the criteria are from the funder. So it might be not only what kind of organisation you are, the size of your organisation, finance-wise, but also what projects they fund, what their themes are, how long they'll fund you for, the duration. They get so many funding applications that if you miss out some of these criteria, that's just a quick reason. Even if you could edit it and change it, it's just a quick reason for them to put you into the no pile. Most funders have a staff member. So most grants and foundations will have a staff member. So if in doubt, always give them a call or email. Just don't waste time on an application that you're not sure you're eligible for. So next, about places to find funders. So I'd say finding funders, in particular trusts and foundations, can be a bit like buses. Sometimes you can't find one that seems to fit what you want to do and what you want to apply for, and then suddenly lots come along at once with deadlines, and you've got more applications to do than you thought that you wanted. So there's lots of websites out there that provide lists of funders. Some of these lists are free, some paid for. But you can normally find most of the information out there for free, I would say, nowadays. Sign up to mailing lists. Your local council might run a mailing list. I know the funder, City Bridge, they're a foundation. They advertise other funding opportunities, as do community funders groups. So just start to build up. The ideal thing is that this information is coming into your inbox, and you're starting to be able to build up a really good idea of what funding is available at any given time and what you might be eligible for. The other good thing to do is to look at charities that do something similar to what you do in your area and nationally. So that might be looking up food charities, other cookery school. Look who funds them. And so other charities will normally have to be thanking funders on their website, or you can look at their reports on the Charity Commission, because they'll normally list, often in their financial section, who has funded them. And vice versa, when you find a funder, look at their reports on the Charity Commission website to see who they funded and the amounts. So, and this again can give you a good idea if you might be a good fit for that funder. So a funder might say they fund health, and then you look at who they've said they funded in their Charity Commission report, and actually to them health might mean hospices, medical equipment. So that tells you probably are thinking of health in a different way. So just a few of example of Made in Hackney funders that come in all shapes and sizes. So a big couple of massive UK funders are the National Lottery Community Fund and the Garfield Weston Foundation. So they give out millions a year to lots of different causes. They have very broad specifications. You know, there's a big team working there. So they are, yeah, so they're kind of quite a good place to go to. We are also funded by some specialist funders. By that, I mean, we've got Veg Fund, who's all about promoting veganism, and a group called Stop Hunger, which is part of a corporation called Sodexo that are focused on food poverty. And then we also have some, you know, really local funders. So Hackney Pro-Kill Charities and obviously Hackney Council. And so we've been, we are eligible for those for 3 different reasons: for our themes, for our geography, and then, you know, the larger ones because they have such a broad remit. So again, before you start writing, as I've said, every funding application is a pitch. You're selling yourself and your work. So, and although your why and the difference you're going to make is not going to fundamentally shift, you still need to make sure that what you're pitching to that particular funder is a story they understand, and the justification for needing funds flows through the questions you're answering or the pitch that you're writing to them. This is particularly important if the funding application process is, you know, please submit 2 to 3 pages on A4 about why you need this funding. So you need to look at what the funder is most interested in and make sure your pitch follows a clear thought process. And you can think about this, you know, for yourself. If someone asked you for money, what would your first response be? It would be why. And then depending on their answer, you might say, you know, can you explain that a little bit more? Why do you need money for that particular item activity? And if you think about the context, if somebody's maybe saying, can I have some money for some new running shoes? And then you say, well, why do you need some more running shoes? You're expecting them to answer, because I want to be more healthy, and that's going to make me feel better in life. If they answered something very different to that, and you're not interested in health, you would think that's a confusing story to follow. So I know that's a little bit of a basic way of explaining it, but that's still the fundamentals of what somebody is trying to understand when they read your request for funding. And it's going to show quite quickly when a funder is reading an application, whether that thought process is clear to them. And a good idea is always to get somebody else to read your funding proposals to check that it's clear to someone who doesn't know anything about your work. A 4th tip is that you can always prepare the core information that you're going to need time and again for your applications, and you can prepare the details of your work. So this is the information that's going to stay really similar application to application, even if your justification for why it is needed may change from funder to funder. So your aim is always going to be that you want to deliver cookery classes, for example, but your why might be changing, whether that funder is interested primarily, for example, in health, or they're more interested in, for example, veganism, or they're more interested in the community benefits aspect. So you can always be prepared with knowing what the key outputs what the key outputs that you want to deliver are. So that's kind of the number of cookery classes, over what time period, how many people you're expecting. And you're always going to have to repeat answers, normally to funders, about your charity's mission, the need that we've talked about. So that's about the data, what's showing there's a need for your work, data, feedback from people, your outcomes. So that's the difference you want to make, your evaluation methods, perhaps, why you are best placed to do this work, and any previous impact, depending on where you are at in your journey of setting up. Another important thing, I think, is that people often leave the budget to the last thing they do when you're writing to a trust or foundation. And actually, you should really do this before you start writing your application, because then you know really that the activities you want to ask for funding for and the budget, they all fit together. The first thing to do is creating your first budget. So I know some of this is covered in the toolkit. In a budget for your organisation, you're going to have, several streams of startup costs, running fixed costs, and running variable costs. However, when you start doing your first budget to a funder, it's probably unlikely that you're going to be putting in everything to show them. That's probably because on most organisations' journeys, they're asking for a small amount of funding to begin with. That's the general process, is that if you're a new organisation or a new initiative, you're going to be asking for smaller amounts, and then you're building up the amounts that people are willing to give you as your costs increase, and also as you become more, trusted to manage larger amounts of money. So when you're applying for your first bits of funding, you're normally starting with quite a basic budget template. You might normally be asking for perhaps a small portion of money to start your first, this is an example, 6-week cookery course. You may have also done your larger organisational budget, which if you have done, amazing, in which case you're going to be cutting this into bits, normally to present to a funder, focusing on the bit that you're asking them to fund and that they want to see. And I say, if you're not sure where to start, always start with your direct costs first of all, and a specific activity, such as this 6-week cooking course. And then you can build on this by adding more classes, adding, for example, more running costs or overhead costs, or adding contributions to salary. And I always tend to use this format because I can easily adjust the cost per unit or the number of units to really get a good idea of what is going to be feasible, either within what the money the funder's offering, or how much money I really need to make sure that all my costs are covered. So am I going to be able to do this project within the amount that the funder is offering, or am I going to have to find some more funding? So that's called match funding, which we don't really have time to go into today. We could talk about budgets a lot, and I'm happy to go into more about budgets in another session if people are really interested. But on the next slide, we can see a lot of the items that are going to end up in your budget as you start to grow. And it is a bit of a, what's the word? Not a trick, but it's a bit of a learning curve on how you develop a budget that looks attractive to the funder that you're sending it to. And by that, I mean ratios of costs such as salaries and rent versus ratio of costs for direct delivery, such as teacher fees and ingredients. Unfortunately, funders are still, I guess, dragging their heels a little bit about really understanding how many fixed costs we have to cover whilst being able to deliver activities. So that does make the fundraiser's job a little harder, but not impossible. And there's always ways to build in more of the costs that you need while still looking attractive to a funder. As I said, I could do a whole other session on developing budgets for fundraising. And obviously in your budget, this leads on to one of the other areas which can help with your fundraising for your activities, or making sure you can get your activities done, which is non-monetary support. So you can build an in-kind support into your funding applications and into your budget. It's something that funders do really like to see. And this obviously not only helps you to keep costs low and to look like you're quite a cost-effective organisation, but obviously you get other benefits as well, whether it's volunteer time and the skills they bring, and as well as things like ingredients, or perhaps low cost or free venue spaces, and also can lead on to developing partnerships. So we're now back onto the tips. So tip 6 is that, unfortunately, this is quite boring, but most applications and funders are going to want you to submit some key policies when you're submitting your grant applications, such as safeguarding or health and safety. And you really don't want to be caught out writing an application at the last minute, which always happens, writing applications at the last minute, no matter how long you've been doing it for, and finding you don't have the right policy at the end when you're ready to submit your application and you need to upload this policy. So you always, I should have mentioned this at the start, so when you're checking your eligibility, always check as well the questions and any additional documents requirements they will need, because the questions are normally easy to write sometimes. That's the easier part. Making sure you've got all the other documents ready can sometimes be the harder part and requires maybe more people to work with. Or you might have to put a new policy together because you're still kind of new and you haven't done that one before. So don't get caught out by that last minute documentation when you're rushing to submit your application towards a deadline. And then following on from that, in terms of administration, it's really important to keep on top of your grant administration. So, it's still a little bit of a one-way street. So, it's still important that those asking for funding reply to the funders quickly, even if they don't reciprocate. You're asking someone to trust you with their money. So you need to, demonstrate that you can demonstrate that when they don't know you through essentially, good, clear, fast communication whenever they ask you a question. And I wouldn't say you should ever feel scared to follow up with a funder, whatever your question might be. Funders are now under, lots of pressure as well. They're getting more and more applications than ever. But there should be someone there that's able to provide you with advice or information on the process, whatever question you may have. A lot of funders now don't necessarily even give you a time frame from when they may tell you if you're successful or not. They might just give you a guideline. And some now say, because they're so busy, that they won't, if you've been unsuccessful, you're just not going to hear from them. So yes, it's really frustrating to not be able to hear a no, even in a timely manner. But of course, it's still okay to email them and check and ask, because sometimes their deadlines do get so extended that you think it's a no, and actually they're still assessing applications. Lots will say that they won't give you any feedback on your application, but where possible, do try and get feedback on your application if you've been unsuccessful, because that's the most useful thing to be able to improve your application, either resubmitting to a different funder or resubmitting to the same funder whenever they allow it. So tip 8. So this goes back to the why. So it's never too early to have evidence on why your work is important and needed. So I know this will probably be more covered when in the toolkit around monitoring and evaluation and learning and understanding your impact. But even as a very kind of start out initiative, or you're just running your first pilot cookery classes, I think don't be scared to start asking people, before and after the classes, how they found the classes. Or before you even start your pilot initiative, ask the community what they want, gather feedback from people. Even if you're not comfortable with, the official terms of monitoring and evaluation, you can still start to gather compelling evidence that your work and your approach is needed and it's successful. And you're only going to be able to start getting repeat funding from any funder, or find funding or get more funding, if you're able to demonstrate that your work is doing what you said it's doing and it's needed. Lots of funders are fine, obviously, when they're starting out. They know that you're not going to have much more information, but they will often expect you to have at least talk to your community and demonstrate that this is something that they want and they need. And as I said before, some of that can come from local data, but talking to people, that's definitely something that funders are really shifted more towards, that you've actually spoken to your community and that you've actually heard from them. There is a growing emphasis on what is, I guess, nicknamed like lived experience, which is, so if you're trying to improve people's health and you're working with people managing health issues, they expect to see that you have talked to people managing health issues, or you maybe have talked to your local health centre or your local diabetes centre, so that they know they're funding something that is wanted and needed in the community. And the final tip is, again, it's quite administrative, but as all of us do, what do we do when we first hear about an organisation or something that we're interested in? We normally Google it. So it is good to check that if you do have a website, that there's no conflicting information. Does the front page at least look kind of fresh? They're not going to do a lot of due diligence on you, but they're probably going to at least have a little bit of a look at you. And the same for your social media. You know, make sure that what you're saying is reflected. What you're saying in your grant application is reflected in your social media and your website. And also, kind of more importantly, if you're already a registered charity, are your accounts up to date? Are the right trustees listed? So if you go on to the next slide, so this is obviously, you know, Made in Hackney website, our Instagram, and then on the right hand side, that's our charity commission page, and that's our accounts page. So lots of trusts and foundations, they will go to your charity commission page if you are going to become a charity, to make sure that this is where they're going to get your latest accounts from. This is going to check that you have uploaded them in time, and they're also going to possibly check that the trustees are up to date, and things like that. So yeah, it's always important to keep those parts of the organisation up to date, because they many trusts and foundations will check that.
Fab. Thank you, Fran, for that really insightful input. I know that I learned a lot from that. We had one question quite linked into that, so I'll ask that now, which is, do you have to be a registered charity to apply for a grant?
No, you don't have to be registered.
Okay. Sorry, I should have said as well that that was a question from the UK, and our context is the UK as well.
Okay. Yeah, so in the UK, you don't have to be a registered charity to apply for a grant from a trust and foundation, but you will see that on a lot of them, they will say only open to registered charities, unfortunately. But some of them are broadening out their criteria of you know, obviously, because you can now be a CIC, or you can be a not-for-profit company. So there are groups out there that will fund other than registered charities, but a lot of kind of, I guess, more traditional, smaller trusts and foundations, they often still have that as a criteria. But again, as I'd say, it doesn't hurt to always ask, and ask the trust and foundation if they do have any, if you can prove that you're not for profit in another way, if they do ever consider that.
Great, thank you. And I'll just use this as an opportunity to ask anyone else that's got questions to please put them in the chat, and I will put them to Fran shortly. I'm just going to go back into our presentation to go through some of the questions that people submitted before the event. So you talked a little bit about this, Fran, about timeframes, but what would your approach actually be to following up with them if they don't get back to you on that?
I mean, it sounds a bit simple, but normally I just send them a polite email and nudge them. If it's, again, it depends on the size. If I can see it's a small trust and foundation with probably not a lot of people there, an email is probably more by them. If it's a larger organisation like the National Lottery, maybe a phone call, because hopefully then somebody can direct you to the right person. You won't know who you're going to be speaking to. But yeah, it's fine to send a nudge. I wouldn't do it on the day they said they were going to get back to you. Give them a couple of weeks grace. It's challenging times for everyone. And then I would send a polite email or a polite phone call.
Great, thank you. And our next question is from someone who's already running a project, would like to start it somewhere else and they need a grant. So what is the best way to go about that?
So it probably depends a little bit on the context. Are you looking to set up in a completely different location, or do you have, what systems you already have in place? Do you already have a venue? But I'd probably still follow, most of the tips. If it's just about money, then obviously I would follow the tips that I've kind of presented above. But if you've already done a project, you're obviously one step ahead, as you already have some of the information on what's work, some evidence that you can do the project. So if you're looking to go to a new place, then, and it's money that's the main issue, I would start to look at what local funders that might be interested in. The charity excellence framework is quite, it's a little bit of a tricky website to navigate, but they are starting to put together lists of funders by region. So that's quite a good place to find regional funders, as well as obviously just, and other databases and Googling it. And if you already have some funding, if somebody's already funded your project in one place and you think they might be interested in another place, obviously you could always ask them for repeat funding and ask if they would like to support you in a different place. If I was doing this, what I would probably do is look about developing a partnership as a place to start. So if you're thinking about starting somewhere else, and I'm thinking geographically, your main thing is you don't necessarily know the community there. You don't have the partnerships. So I would be thinking, is there a local, so obviously local churches do lots of things in the UK, community centres, other charities that might be interested in partnering with you to host your activities. They already have the beneficiaries. So they might be able to help with a lot of in-kind support, help with you to develop your network in that area, and provide some, and then all you might be looking for is perhaps a bit of seed funding to just maybe cover your direct costs to start a pilot there. So I hope that's answered the question.
Thank you. We have had a flurry of questions coming through in the chat, which is great. Okay. We'll take these 3 questions just now, then we're going to move back into the presentation to talk a little bit about crowdfunding, and then there'll be the opportunity for more questions. So if your question has been selected for now, I will come to it. So first up, when applying for funding, do you have advice for how far in advance you should be budgeting for, e.g. 6 months, 5 years?
Well, again, it depends a little on your journey and whether you are trying to run some pilot initiatives to gain some understanding, or whether you're trying to, you've kind of done that and now you're like, I want a whole year of, I want to run these activities over a whole year. So I think, first of all, it's not necessarily the length, it's probably thinking more, what do I want to commit to over a certain period of time, because it's also about you. If this is something you're committed to, then I think a budget for 1 to 2 years, if you're quite early on in the process, is where I would start with, partly because you're unlikely to get more funding than that to begin with if you're an early initiative. Secondly, there's not a lot of funders that fund more than 1 to 2 years anyway, in the UK at least. And thirdly, because if you're at the start of your journey, loads of things might change and you might not be quite sure what you want to do. But also, I think, yeah, definitely building a project over a 12-month period and submitting a 12-month budget is really helpful, because, yeah, rushing things and doing things in 6 months is not really that fun anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And it's part of so many of these projects is to create that sustainability for the future as well. Similar question to that one, we have one on how do you plan for how much and the frequency of applying? The frequency question you might have sort of answered there, but maybe the how much we should focus on.
How much money to apply for, and how many applications?
Well, just even how frequent you apply for it. Maybe over a year you know that you need £200,000. It's a lot of money. Maybe how would you know that, and how would you know how frequently to apply?
This is why I guess you start off with your budget first, whether you're looking at whether you're at the stage where you've got a whole organizational budget, or whether you're at the stage of going, I want to do 100 cookery classes in the next 2 years. So yeah, you need to start with the numbers, because that's going to form the basis of what you want to apply for. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, the how much is being dictated. If you're looking at the trusts and foundations route, a lot of that's going to be dictated by the trust and foundation. So if I have a budget of, let's say, 100,000 over 2 years, I would probably start to think, okay, I'm going looking at those different fundraising options, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to try and raise maybe 75% of that from trusts and foundations, 20% of that from, I don't know, a crowdfunder, and maybe I'm going to try and cover 5-10% from in-kind. And that's going to be my strategy. And then I look at that number again for those trusts and foundations. So that, I think I said 75%, so £75,000. And it probably means that, unless I'm very lucky, I'm probably going to be getting that money maybe from 4 or 5 different locations, because for smaller organisations, your average grant might be between £5,000 to £20,000 in a go. So, for example, National Lottery, their awards for all, they've just put it up to £20,000, which is great. So that's great. They've gone from £10,000 to £20,000. But yeah, if your income is less than £100,000-200,000, unfortunately, most people are going to be giving you between 5 to 15. So that gives you an idea of how many chunks of money you're going to be able to get. And you might need to multiply that by, do kind of like 3 to 4 as many applications, given the success rate. So yeah, it's a little bit of a slog, but sometimes it can be a little bit easier when you're starting out, because there's actually more organizations. There's quite a lot of funders that are supporting smaller organizations and starting out. Then it kind of drops off a little bit as you get bigger. So you actually might find securing some of those first bits of money, if you've got a compelling story, maybe a little bit easier than you anticipate. And then it might get trickier as you've already had their money and you're then looking for your next round of your next group of funders.
So the next question, before we go into crowdfunding, and then I'll come back to any additional questions if we have time, is about the evidence that you talked about. So how do you present the evidence? The example asked is about feedback from a school or parents, so nothing official.
Your evidence, as I said, it can either fall into kind of like what you kind of call data. So that's going to be either your statistics, so not data, so data that I haven't collected. So that's going to be maybe from the local government or the national government. And then you've got evidence that you collect yourself. And again, that could be, you could ask people surveys. So in this instance where you're talking to a school or some families, you could give them a survey that allows you to collect and present something that looks more like statistics and data. 80% of people said they wanted cookery classes focused on health. 80% of people are managing health conditions at this school. If you're asking them more like a focus group, like a feedback group, again, what you tend to do is you'll be leading a conversation with questions that you're going to be asking, and then you will be presenting the information to the funder in a way that's obviously more of a narrative. We held a focus group and there was strong consensus that everyone in that group wanted to have cookery classes on health. In particular, Sarita said, I haven't been able to get my prescription anymore. I'm feeling really bad. I can't get to see the GP. I want to do some diet related things. So you present it in more of a narrative way, but with the understanding that I've talked to 20 people in a focus group.
I'm just going to bring the presentation back up. There you go.
Okay, so just a little bit on crowdfunding before we end today. So this can be quite an appealing way of generating your income, especially maybe at particular points. So maybe when you're first starting, or maybe when you're trying to raise money for a particular set of activities. This is something that Made in Hackney has had a lot of experience as, and we have been quite successful. So crowdfunding is not easy. So whenever we're looking at these fundraising methods, there's no magical one that is easier than another. With crowdfunding, obviously, it's often more about storytelling and having a really specific ask that you feel your community or network are going to get behind. You know, normally you need to have good photos or a good video or some kind of story that's captivating people. You need to normally have some people that you know are going to donate at the start of the crowdfunder, because that encourages other people to donate. It looks like a success. And you do need some kind of network that you're going to use. So if you don't have a huge social media presence, or you don't have much of a network in the community, or you're not very well known, you've got to ask yourself, who am I sending this crowdfunding to? Who's going to donate? And it is a full-time job during a crowdfunding campaign. So there's a lot of preparation work, maybe up to 8 weeks before you're going to launch your campaign, to make sure that as many people know about it as possible, that you're securing some of those people that are going to donate on day one, and then keeping lots of interest in it during the campaign. And then obviously at the end, making sure that everyone's thanked. So I would say if anyone's going to do a crowdfunding campaign, it's best to start with a realistic target, a smaller target, get some practice at it, and to think about suit your skills. Are you happy with kind of marketing and talking to people about it and getting the word out there, and to get a feeling for what it feels like to run a crowdfunding campaign. So start small and give it a go if it's something that appeals to you and your skills.
Okay, fab. Thank you. I'm just going to ask the next couple of questions here before we wrap up. So this was one sent in advance. So if you are a social enterprise, not a CIC, which stands for Community Interest Company, or charity, how do you find people that will fund your projects?
Okay, so I'm going to assume here that this means that somebody wants to set up an organisation as a business with a social purpose. So you're essentially going to be a company, a not-for-profit company. And so you don't intend to register as a charity. I think social enterprise can be confusing because some charities will refer to themselves as social enterprise. I don't think there's a set definition. So I'm going to assume you want to stay as a company. So in that case, there's a few options for you. There are some organisations that really focus on social businesses because they really want to see kind of more financially sustainable business models behind good businesses and behind social enterprises. So there's in the UK, there is the group called Unlimited, like UNLTD. They have a special startup award specifically for social enterprises. Some funders, like the National Lottery, will consider companies if you can demonstrate to them that you are a not-for-profit company. And I think there's probably, as I said, there are probably other funders that will consider you as an option. And social investment, I'm not an expert on social investment, but it is the other funding option out there that is being offered to kind of not-for-profit businesses. I would head to, if you're definitely not going to enter into the kind of charity or CIC world, in terms of fundraising, I would definitely go to Unlimited for advice, and also the School of Social Entrepreneurs in the UK, because they've just got 2 websites like packed full of information and resources and funding and sessions on fundraising.
Great, thank you. And we have another one. What helped in your research, so Made in Hackney's research on fundraising?
So I assume this is about kind of finding funders and also maybe different types of fundraising. I think it's a little bit of like practice and remaining adaptable when it comes to like trusts and foundations. It can be really helpful to work with an experienced fundraiser to begin with, to see kind of how they write applications, or ask someone to see their successful fundraising applications. I'm sure there are lots of friendly charities that will share some of their applications with you, especially if they've already fulfilled everything. And getting some support, getting people to read over your applications. There's also organisations out there that support charities and offer tutorials and sessions on fundraising and writing grant applications. I think also like understanding what your preference and skill set is as a fundraiser. I'm quite good at funders like detailed applications, like around impact, and there's a really clear process. I'm less good at funders that want you to kind of maybe sell them a vision where maybe a little bit more, I guess, over the top language is one way to put it, is required. Yeah, definitely think about your skills and what you enjoy, because fundraising is hard work. So it's also important to, I think what you're good at and also what you enjoy most of the different types of fundraising, because different skills, if you're a great people person and you love meeting people, then that might tell you that a different type of fundraising is better for you than sitting at a desk and going through kind of more traditional grant applications and processes.
Great. And coming in on the chat, we've had a question. So if we have different cooking classes aimed at different groups and they've got different outcomes, do you do a grant, apply for one grant or multiple grants?
So really, this is going a little bit more into, I guess, your veering a little bit off fundraising, but really your outcomes as an organisation should be the same no matter what group you're working with. So from Made in Hackney, whether we're working with young carers or we're working with families, our outcomes are always the same. We want to see people eating more, increasing the volume of plants that they're putting into their diet. They're eating less processed foods, that they're feeling more connected to their community, that they have a sense of improved health and well-being. Those outcomes for us always stay the same no matter what group we work with. Obviously, for different groups, there might be a different emphasis, a slightly bigger emphasis on a community aspect versus the health aspect. But we're still always measuring the same thing, because we don't have time as an firstly, your organization should always have the same mission. So you should always know that you're trying to change the same things in people. But also you'll find it really difficult to ever measure multiple outcomes with multiple groups, because you'll be, it will just be a lot too much work.
So I think I'll start wrapping up now in case any last minute burning questions come through. But I want to give Fran an opportunity if you've got any other tips or anything else you want to say just to conclude today's session.
There is not a secret art to fundraising. A lot of it is, unfortunately, a bit of a slog, but you do have to get comfortable. I think if you follow some of those tips of knowing what you want money for and why, that will make your applications easier. And yeah, don't be scared of asking for money. It's just going to be part of the job, unfortunately.
So everything we've covered in today's session there's a lot more support on globalplantkitchens.org. There's a whole module on fundraising. As Fran mentioned, there are documents and resources in the toolkit. So please do go through that. Please share it with other people relevant in your vegan community, cookery, school or kitchen. So yeah, I just want to finally thank everyone for attending. Huge thank you to Fran for such a detailed and informative session. And yeah, we hope to see more of you at an event soon. So thank you very much. And that is us done for today.